I will be. Okay. Sorry, I forgot to do that actually. Sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead. Sorry.
And the other question I had, it's kind of off topic, but it's
No
not.
problem.
What planning tools do you guys use, like apps and stuff, to decide to go on a shoot to begin with? If even just a list of them, it'd be great without any
First
detail.
and most important one is Stellarium.
Okay, yeah.
That's probably the go-to one that I would use.
The most comprehensive
And
planetarium out there, really, isn't it?
yeah, absolutely.
Very
It's free.
customizable for your circumstances as well.
It's free and it's on, and it does everything that you need to do. So on your
It-
phone, do everything.
it-
That's how I basically plan initially. Now I do use ASIRs. Some people have them, some people don't. But in there you can do a lot of planning as well. Basically, you can set up your framing and all that sort of stuff. But the main thing, the other thing is Telescopus is another one. It's a web.
Yeah.
You go to and you can do all your planning there as well. So that's the two ones that I would use in particular, particularly Stellarium.
Thanks very
The
much.
PC version of Stellarium is actually more comprehensive. If you find that's more
Easier to
acceptable.
use, yeah.
And on the PC, there's a lot more tools available for you. You know.
Yeah. In the one online, the thing that I think is the best thing is that it can show you the visibility of the target through the night, and see how it's going up and down. You know, as it's going across the meridian. So it's excellent tool, to be honest. And I don't think there's a better app for Astro stuff on the phone anyway. That's for sure, that I've come across. There is another one.
Telescopius as well. You can have
that's,
a profile. So you create your own profile and you can add your own field of views to it, and put in your location as well. And then it's got a tonight's best.
Yeah.
So you go in, you log in, and you can go tonight's best, and it'll use your location and your field of view to give you a list of objects that are good to target this evening.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
The only other one that I would maybe use on occasion would be Sky Guide, and the only reason I use it because you can go into an HA mode. I don't know if you know what HA is, but it's like it's like this, you know. So it'll show you in the sky where the most brightest hydrogen alpha targets are, and you can sort of use that as a guide to find where you might want to shoot for. If you're using narrowband, I don't know if you know what that is, but it's a type of filter that you can apply to your equipment when you're shooting, to just focus on hydrogen alpha, which is the main emission gas cloud in the night sky. Okay.
What's that app called again, Marty?
Sky Guide. It's
Guide.
again free, so I use it just to go, well, that's nice during that period of time where the hydrogen alpha is very bright in it, and then I would maybe use that as where I would just go in and zoom. But as you go along, you'll find that you'll figure out more and more and the better targets yourself, you know, because you learn a lot more as you go, you know. So
is that an Android app or?
No, it's an iPhone app, but you can get for Android as well.
Okay, I can't find it on mine.
If you have an Android, I don't know. I don't use Android, unfortunately. Sorry.
It's not coming up here.
So
Sky Guide, was it?
Yeah, Sky Guide.
No, two separate words. Yeah,
two separate words. Yeah. So I unfortunately don't have it on my. I can't share my phone, but it's SKY space GUID. So okay.
Is that photo pills any good for this kind of stuff?
Not really. It's really only for Milky Way type shooting. Okay,
Yeah,
it's excellent for that. In fact, it's probably the go-to for doing Milky Way or meteor radiant showers. So, for example, photo pills would be, if you look at it, you can see, you know, the meteors per hour for any meteor shower and when is the best time to shoot and all that sort of stuff. You know.
Okay. And lunar as well, and solar. So for lining up.
Yeah, so it's more for that
targets,
rather than deep sky. Deep sky wouldn't be in it at all. You know, so I've used it for figuring out Milky Way, where the Milky Way would be at a particular time of year and where it'd be shooting if I was doing that type of shooting, or for trying to think what else I'd used it for doing you know, star trails. It'll figure out what exposure you need for different type of star trails and things like that. So.
Okay.
And if you have a location, like you've got a lighthouse, for figuring out exactly when the moon is going to be perfectly on top of that lighthouse.
Okay.
You can put in your location, the time of date, and it'll tell you exactly where to be and when to be there. And
Brilliant.
They're
This one is the Sky Guide, you said?
Sky Space Guide, but look, that's only, I use it sparingly, so I've just mentioned the ones that I have. I'm trying to think of any others.
well, Sky Guide is really pretty.
Yeah, it is.
It's probably the prettiest app out there, and that the HA feature is dead handy, especially if you're getting in, like you probably use it for mosaics as well, Marty. So
Yeah.
having
Well,
a look,
I used to use it more when I was trying to figure out what targets to pick, but I sort of know the targets now. So
yeah, but even just knowing where the gas and dust is in the background, it's great for that.
I believe the people who designed it, they actually went and they took like thousands of photos up in North Hemisphere and the Southern Hemisphere. There's a father and a son did it, and they put together the whole thing, you know. So it's quite impressive. So
Have you guys seen the MO Pro mobile observatory? It's just MO Pro. It has like a lot of things as well about the moon, about the ISS, the sun.
That's a new one.
Night's
What's it
best.
called?
But that's
MO
for Android though. Yeah, MO.
MO is
MO Space Pro.
all right. I don't think it's on iPhones.
I have this on Android. I find it quite useful because it has a mix of things. It has like about the eclipses. There is a section for the sun, another for the moon, another for the ISS, tonight's best, live view, planisphere, events, etc., etc.
Okay. All right. I've never used it, and it's not available on iPhone, I think, unfortunately. So it'd be nice. Sounds like a good one, you know. So I'll see if I can find it, but do a bit more digging for it. So, okay.
Thanks very much, guys. That's
Not at all.
already been brilliant.
No, but that's what we're here. Like any questions you can throw at it. So, so I'm going to. Some of this is going to be very basic for people who've, like Brendan and Dom. All right, so apologies. All right. So I'm going to just go through this, and as I said, any questions and queries, just throw it at me. You know, so this might be jumping in quite deep. So as I said, I'm not entirely sure. Some of these people might find this a bit difficult. But as I said, ask questions away. So I'm assuming that at this point you've taken your exposures, which are light frames, right? Okay, so you've picked a target, you've taken your light frames, and there's the next thing to do is then I assume you can see my screen, yes?
Yeah.
Okay. Is that you would see in your images that you would see these are the typical problems that you would have when you're taking exposures, right? You would have vignetting, which is basically like a well exposed center and then sort of a frame around it like this, where you see either a dark frame or light frame around it, which is causing it was just called vignetting. Okay, you might also on DSLRs or some older types of cameras, you might see this type of thing here, which is basically called amplo. All right, and it's just thermal noise added in by a small amplifier unit on the side of, and it's projecting thermal noise onto the image. And the most common thing that you would see is probably this type of thing where you've got dust motes, and these are basically like donuts, which are on your in your images. All right, so, but that's not necessarily something that these are things that you can actually overcome. All right, and that's by using calibration frames. Okay, so I don't know if people come across this stuff before, or but I'll try and explain as best I can. Okay, so and based on the camera type that you have, there's different type of frames or calibration frames that you need to take, and there's ways of taking the frames. So for example, a DSLR cameras, you would generally take what's called darks, bias, and flats, where and Astro cameras, which are dedicated Astro cameras, you wouldn't take bias frames, but you may take the other three types of frames. Okay, and they do different jobs. Okay, the calibration frames are absolutely essential when you're doing deep sky photography. So for example, if I move on to this is an example of where you had like vignetting, there might be dust motes, there might be something, you know, you get, you know, it's a very poor looking image, but with calibration, it would, for, you know, type of frames you're taking, you can actually produce quite a good image when you've stacked. Okay, so they're very essential when you're doing deep sky photography. Okay, the first type, and please feel free to interrupt, as I said. So, or if you don't think this is relevant, then I can move on. But so the first type of frame, and probably the most important, especially for myself, is flat frames. Okay, and these remove or reduce the effect of vignetting and dust motes. Okay, which is very common on telescopes and anything like that, where you would have dust. You know, they build up, and when you're taking the images, you might see this donut shape, these like this on the image, or you might have vignetting across it. And I'll explain how to detect them shortly. The next, probably for DLSR people, then you would take bias frames, and this basically is your shot noise or read noise that are taken from the exposures that you're taking. Okay. The next type is dark frames, and these reduce the effect of amp glow, thermal noise, and hot pixels. And the final type is dark flats, which is your calibration basically frames for your flat frames. Okay, so these aren't necessarily necessary for DLSRs, but you can take them. Okay, so and these added together, I know that it's looks complicated, but basically there's 5 types of frames. There's the actual light frames that you're taking your target, your flat frames, dark flats, and bias. Okay, and they all have a different job to try and improve the stacked image that you're going to produce. Okay, so and they're relatively easy to take, and I'll explain how to take them now. Sorry. So bias frame, you may have heard of these. So basically, whatever shutter speed that you're using on your camera, you take that as fast as possible. You keep your lens cap on, and it's the same ISO as your light frames. Okay. So whatever, say your 1600 ISO, put the camera cap on, take the fastest shutter speed you can possibly do, and you would normally capture about 20 or 30 of those. Probably more the better, but I'm just saying that's typically what you would take. Okay, these will all be added into your stacking software at the which I'll demonstrate in shortly, and they will add them in. They'll create a master bias or master dark, or for example. The next type is dark frames, and basically these should be taken at the same exposure length as your light frames. So for example, if you're taking light frames at 5 minutes, you take exposure length of 5 minutes for your dark frames. Basically it's very dependent on the temperature. So the whole idea is to reduce thermal noise and reduce amp glow. So they need to be taken at the same temperature as you're taking your light frames at. Okay, so the way to take them is when you've done your light frames, okay, you put the lens cap on your camera or telescope and take images of 20 or 30 of those at the same ISO and same exposure as the light frames. Is that clear? Any questions?
Yeah, I have a quick question. So just on the bias, because is it common that you could take a couple of pictures using a certain ISO and then you could change that? So for the bias, would you change that as well? Or it's not common to be changing ISO?
But it depends on your target, I would imagine. You know, so if you're trying to take something which is like I don't use a DLSR, but I used to, and but I'd imagine if you're taking, say, a foreground image, your ISO might be different from, say, a longer exposure. You know, say you're taking exposure of the Milky Way, and you're taking exposure of the front, you know, the whatever's in front of you, landscape, then you might have a different ISO or a different exposure. I'm probably not the right person to answer that, but it's probably somebody who's done more landscape, nightscape photography. But if you were, you would definitely then take the different ISO bias frames, bias frames for the two different ISOs. And then
Yeah,
when
so
you're stacking them, you can assign it to the different exposures that you have. Sorry, go on, Tom.
yeah. So if you do take exposures with different ISOs, you have to use corresponding bias frames at the same ISO, because the numbers will just work out differently. So your ISO is basically an amplifier. So the actual end result of your bias frames, the actual count that you have, will be different.
Yeah, you have a different read noise, you know, if
Yeah.
you had the different ISO, you know. So does that make sense, Julie?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And then a second one, I guess applies for both for bias and dark frames. I think I think maybe Tom gave me an advice on these. I think one picture that I posted, and you said like I think I asked like, is that okay to just remove the telescope and do the frames
The dark
just
frames.
with the lens
Yeah.
cap? But I wonder, even though it's okay, like, is there any difference at all if you
shouldn't
do
be.
with the telescope
I
or
wouldn't have
without?
thought so. As long as your telescope is covered, I usually do it if I'm doing dark frames. I put it in the dark room, you know, or sometimes if I want to do dark frames, I would take the camera. I broke down everything, and it was it was a remote session. I could take the dark frames at home, but that's because I've got a cool camera. But slightly different than a DLSR, of course. You know, we should be done at the same temperature for
Yeah,
the
so
dark
the
frames.
bias frames you can take at any time.
Yeah,
They're not
bias
temperature
are
dependent.
it's not dependent on temperature.
Your dark frames, you can still have a library of dark frames that you take, at 0 degrees, 5 degrees, 10 degrees. I think a couple of degrees isn't going to make much difference, but temperature will affect the amount of thermal noise that you have, clearly.
And if you have a library, is that something that you'd refresh like every couple of months? Let's say if you built a library for a year and you've got like a library for different temperatures on the second year, would you reset and do it all over again? Or
Yeah, you would.
You would take them every 6 months or something like
Yeah.
that, you know. So if you had a library of master frames, yes.
But the good news is that with the temperature outside within 1 month or 2 month period isn't going to change a whole lot at nighttime. There's not a huge amount of fluctuation. Certainly not enough. So you could, on a cloudy night, you can go out and set up and take your dark frames, and especially if you're taking long exposures, you need to take 35-minute dark frames. That's still 2-3 hours of
it's a
exposure.
lot of time wasted taking dark
yeah,
dark frames if you can do them another time, which it
yeah, good tip for the cloudy days.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks. Yep.
No,
Thanks.
not a problem. So sorry, there is actually a typo here. That should say flat frames, not flat darks. My bad. So these are always the one that causes the most problem for people to take. All right. So the main thing with flat frames, and probably I think they're probably the most important one to take, particularly for myself, which I have a off-axis guider, and there's a sort of a large dark vignette at one side of the frame. It's very important for me to take flats. The camera and telescope should be in the same focus if possible, and rotation. So you're not rotating the camera so that, say, the dust mote might be in the front and now you've moved it around. So the whole idea of it is that when you're taking the flats, they should be taking the same optical train should be the same. So your telescope, your lens, your camera should be all the same. Now it doesn't necessarily have to be, but that's the idea is to do that. The flat frame should be, you're trying to create an evenly illuminated flat field of image. So where the histogram peak of the image you're taking should be probably to the left of the mid. So the peak should be to the left of the mid of the histogram. They should be taken at the same ISO as your flat frames, and you typically capture about 20 or 30, 40 of them. Okay. Now there's different ways to capture them, and I've shown 2 different here. So one is somebody's got a white sheet of some sort, and outside they're taking an image of the sky. Now I don't typically do that. I used to do that, but I have one of these. All right. So this is a flat field generator, and basically allows you to generate a flat field every single time. you know, so nice and diffuse, evenly illuminated. Definitely, if you're a serious astrophotographer, I would recommend getting one of these. Okay. Not this particular one. This one's actually particularly good, I have to say. So it's a geo-picked flat field generator. You can get, you know, you can get them on any Astro shop. Should be able to sell them. Okay, and that allows you to change the actual you know, the brightness, so that you can create, depending on whatever filters you're using. For example, maybe some like hydrogen alpha, which is very narrow band, or even RGB filters. You can actually use this to create a nicely evenly illuminated field. Now, it's not to say you have to use them. You can even use an iPad, and I've done that in the past as well. Just a simple iPad, look up white picture, you know, for an image, and then change the brightness to determine what you need to when you're taking your image. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah, just wondering about the difference on the brightness there, and how do you gauge that? How do you go about that?
So
The filters, like, and
sorry, one sec. So what I would typically do is say, so I'll just bring up Paint. So excuse my really bad drawing, right? So say this is your histogram, okay, and this is your mid. So I typically try and shoot with the peak around here, okay. So I would change. So say, for example, I was using, this is just typical example, a red, green, blue filter. I would typically be exposing for 3 to 5 seconds and change the brightness so that the peak is around here. So this is 0 and this is your max, okay? So it's fully saturated and darks down here. So your peak is somewhere around here, okay? And I would then, and if I was shooting, for example, narrowband, it might be 10, sometimes 20 seconds, depending on the filter. So I'd be changing the brightness to get
something to look out for there. If you are using a DSLR, is that if you're looking at the histogram at the back of your DSLR, that's already stretched. So they're applying a stretch to the image. When Marty is saying he wants his histogram peak just to the left of mid, that should be on your raw frame.
Yeah.
okay.
So it'll take a little bit of, you'll take a couple of different brightness levels, get those raw frames into your software, and have a look at where the peak is.
Would that be the same on the ACI? So, you know, the way it displays the image on your phone, and it's a stretched image, so the histogram that's showing
that's an auto, just so that you can see it, basically.
Yeah.
But the histogram and the ASIR is the actual full range of the histogram. So I use it myself, and that's what I typically do is I'd look at the histogram, the ASIR, and it's down at the bottom, typically, right? And I would then make sure that, you know, your peak is around here somewhere, you know, just shy of the 50%. And
so the histogram that the ACI shows you is the actual raw histogram. It's just those sliders you use to do the stretch, and that's where you're setting your 0 point and your full white point using those sliders.
Okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's perfect.
So, and then the final type, it would be dark flats. All right, and basically ignore that there's a typo, sorry, but use the same exposure length as your flat frame. So it's basically darks, same for your dark frames, but the exposure length is now the flats. Whatever the flat exposure length will say 10 seconds, your dark flats are the same exposure length as your flat frames. Okay. So we cover the image, cover the telescope, or your camera, take it the same ISO or gain as your camera, and then capture 30 or 40 of those. Okay.
Is there a sweet spot for the exposure on the flats?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying was
With
if you can, there's no, you know, it's no, you know,
okay, gotcha.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, so there's your histogram.
Gotcha.
Sorry, my bad, but there's your histogram, and then there's the mid. So it's just somewhere here, you know.
But you do want your exposure to be a couple of seconds.
Yes. Yeah.
So not, 100 milliseconds. So, try and do at least a second. 2 or 3 seconds would be better. So adjust your brightness. So even a couple of sheets of paper can help diffuse the brightness. I think what's important is to have something that's repeatable, because then it's quick and easy. And what I typically do is I have 3 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds. So I can reuse my flat darks the same way I use my normal darks, because I know I'm shooting at something for 3, 5. So I can have a library of 3, 5, 10, 20 second flat darks. And then all I need to do on the night is shoot those flats. So just in case there's dust has moved around or whatnot, or if I've rotated the camera, I just need to shoot my flat darks, and I can reuse the library of dark frames. So I'll have a sheet of paper, and I know exactly for what I need to do to get how many sheets of paper, the brightness level on the iPad to get my 3 or 5 or 10 seconds.
Got it. Thanks.
No problem. Okay, so I'm assuming then everybody knows why you stack, right? So the whole idea of stacking.
Can I ask one question before you jump forward? Most of my experience of gathering my data is through the ACI. So it was always lights, darks, biases, and flats. So the new terminology for me tonight is So the new terminology tonight for me would be the dark flats.
Mm-hmm.
And you said earlier on there as well, with a cooled camera, you said you don't need to take biases.
Generally not needed. Generally not needed.
Yeah, no. See, I didn't know that. This is all new to me. Those.
So what camera do you have? Just as a matter of interest.
The ASI 294, one-shot color.
Right. Okay.
No, I just said that this is new to me. So where would be the gain in using the dark flat? So
the dark flats is basically for your thermal noise or hot pixels for your flat frames.
So these dark flats remove the use of a normal dark, is it?
Yeah, it's a normal dark for your flat frames, basically. So
your flat frames need to be calibrated.
Yeah, your flat frames need to be calibrated
before you
as
put
well.
them in calibrate again. Like, okay,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So anyway, that's the whole purpose of them. I know there seems a lot of exposures, but a lot of these exposures can be done after you've taken, your light.
Yeah, I understand that. No, that was just a new step for me. I didn't know that existed.
But with that camera that you have, Michael, the 294 bias frames don't work great. In fact, they don't work.
Okay.
You should use flat darks.
You get weird looking stuff if you use bias frames, like the images that
I could have hit a wall maybe 4 months ago. I can't seem to get any better quality, and I just didn't know what to do to get beyond it. I found that my stacks had this kind of a rough graininess to it.
They're always going to have a rough graininess anyway, to be honest. Like, that's typical because you're shooting at such a very low, they're very dim targets. There's a lot of noise going to be brought into your camera. The other thing for the 294, I had one myself and I sold it. Sorry, I still have it. Sorry. I know exactly what you mean, but when you're taking, particularly taking flats and stuff, they do need to have exposure between 3 to 5 seconds. Otherwise, you get this weird looking color frame. It's kind of
turquoise color.
It's very odd looking.
Yeah, I to be fair, I was very lucky. The ACI does seem to do kind of okay with the auto calibration,
Yeah.
And
I never use the auto calibration.
The flat itself seems to be okay, but I didn't know that the bias was a bit of a problematic with the 294. Let's see, so.
One of the things with it doing the auto calibration is that it'll take an exposure that might not be easy to match to a master frame. So, for example, the dark flats, I have a master dark flat that I have for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 20 seconds. I have
a library like that.
Exactly. So it saves a lot of time, to be honest. Like saves a lot of time. Okay, so
just talk about the dark flats for a sec. So the dark flats won't make a huge difference. So the dark flats are for calibrating your flats. If you don't calibrate your flats properly, and then you calibrate with those flats, you'll get a slight over or under correction in the corners typically. So more often than not, you're using your flats for dust bunnies and vignetting. So it might over or under correct the vignetting if you haven't. Yeah. So if you end up with those after calibration, if you end up with your corners being darker than you'd expect or brighter, usually it's brighter because you've overcorrected. That's typically.
I do struggle because I am one shot color and I'm in a Bartle 6 and I'm surrounded by LEDs, you know, so I was always blaming the LED lights, you know.
So if you're, I don't know if you have some filters or like CLS filters as well might be helpful. Michael.
I do, yeah. I use the IDAS LPS D3. It's designed for down kind of more broad, the broadband light of the LED. It's designed to kind of notch that out as best it could. Like it helps. At one stage, I just went onto the L enhance and started doing a bit more narrowband stuff, and I just gave up on galaxies. It was so bad. I bought this filter and kind of I'm able to play around with galaxies again, like, you know. So
I find like I shoot from Bartle 8, so I've given up completely doing any kind of color. Forget about it. It doesn't work. So so the only suggestion we're doing using the color cameras to go remote, you know, so 2 or 3 Bartle 3, 4 maybe, but I wouldn't be even trying on any kind of suburban or urban, to be honest, or even where I live. It's a waste of time, total waste of time, you know. Anyway, okay, so I assume everybody understands the concept of stacking, right? Hopefully, or maybe if you don't, please raise your hand. But the whole idea of it is to, you know, boost your signal to noise ratio. Okay, so you know, adding more frames will improve your image, obviously diminishing returns. Okay, and my analogy is to, if you remember the old acetates, if you stack the old acetates together, you get a much darker image. So that's the idea of it. Okay. All right. So the whole idea after stacking, you should have an image which is maybe and calibration comes out much nicer looking. Unfortunately, if whoever's on the iPhone, I might kick you because you keep just talking when and I have to mute you all the time, unfortunately. So if you want to speak, please speak. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just bring up Astro Pixel Processor. Okay. Sorry, I have it here open somewhere. Hold on. Okay. Hopefully that'll work. All right. So Astro Pixel Processor, I'm going to just call it APP because otherwise it's hard to speak it all the time. I know it looks complicated when you open it, but it is actually much simpler than it appears. Okay.
Share your screen there, Marty.
Oh, I'm not sharing the screen. Sorry. Share again. 1 sec. I actually might have shared the wrong one. Okay, hold on. 1 second. All right. Screen 1. Yes. Okay, so that's that one. Sorry, I'll just open it again. I'll bring it over. Can you see it now?
Yep.
Okay. So first thing I'd say is ignore all this stuff over here because that's just, I don't know what it does. I've never touched this. I know that sounds terrible, but I've never actually tweaked. I don't know if you have ever tweaked any of that stuff, Tom. I've never touched it. Or Brendan.
It's if you're going to do all the processing after the stacking, you would use that side, I believe.
Yeah. I've never actually
ever
used it. I've never used it. So, okay. So in here,
hey, Catherine. Good, thanks.
God's sake, whoever it is, whoever's on the iPhone, I will kick you in a minute if you just. It's all I can hear is background noise. If you want to ask the question, please ask the question, but please don't leave your mic unmuted. Okay, so over here, it shows these tabs. Okay, so these are quite important. All right. And these are all the various frames that you're going to load in. Okay. All right. So this is your light frames. Basically, this is where you load in. So you just select that, and then you pick the light frames that you're going to load in. So I'm just going to load in some light frames that I took from the California Nebula. So these are all my light frames that I took for the hydrogen alpha. Now these can be anything. It's just an example. Okay. So these are hydrogen alpha frames that I took. Okay. And it'll come up with this pop-up asking you what type of frame it is. Okay. So in this case, you can add your own if you want, but in this case, it's hydrogen alpha. Press OK. And then it'll ask me what session did you take that with. Okay. Now you can say session 1 or whatever session it is, so you can stack frames from multiple different sessions, and so, or you can stack them all together independent of the session. But the reason you would select probably the session is that your flat frames associated with them would be associated with the session you're doing. You understand? So press OK, and that then loads the frames down here. Okay, down in this tab here. So this slider here will do that. If I want to add in other frames, and for example, my Auction 3 frames, I would then browse to that, select the Auction 3 frames, like this, press OK, and assign them to the Auction 3, press OK, and then I can say it's session 2. Okay, it may not be that, but this is the way of doing it. So then they would be appearing here. So these can see there's the hydrogen alpha frames, the Auction 3 frames. Okay. Now the next frames that you would add in would be.
Oh, no. I've done Illustrator, digital marketing.
Mike, Mike.
InDesign.
No.
Well, I'm doing InDesign now.
Sorry, I'm going to, if he does it again, I'm going to kick him. Sorry. Apologies for that. So in here, then you select your flats, go to the flat frames that you have taken. So these are all the flat frames I have. Okay, you can see in this case, they're 10 seconds for my hydrogen alpha, and they're all for the same session. I select those. I can sign them to the hydrogen alpha, and then select the session 1 that I was working with, press OK. Okay, so there's 30 flat frames for those. Okay. Okay, these are the flat frames for those images, those particular images. Okay, makes sense so far. And then I would do the same thing for my Auction 3. So I'm just going to do that quickly. All right, so Auction 3, and there were session 2. Okay, so you would then can and then add in darks and dark flats. So that's the same thing. Okay, so you would go in and then you would add in my darks. Sorry, I'll just back out a second. So my darks, click the run button. I go into I have exposures for 10 minutes or 600 seconds, and I select those and I'd add them in. I'm not going to add them in, and I'll explain why in a second. And then I would do the same for my dark flats, which are 10-second exposures for the flats. Okay, so then you would have a series of flats, darks, dark flats, and our bias if you had DLSRs. I don't obviously use them. In the case of what I have actually I've done this processing before, so I have created a master frame. Okay, so this is a master flat frame, which is a stacked of 30 images of darks that have been created previously. And I just select that. So this will be this one, which is 600 seconds master dark. Okay, and I would assign it to all the channels because both the Auction 3 and the hydrogen alpha were taken for 10 minutes. Okay. So I'm just selecting that on all sessions. Okay, so and the same for my dark flat. So my dark flat is a stacked 10-second exposure for those, for the flat frames. So they're for all channels and all sessions. Okay, so I have a series of my flat frames, my flats, sorry, my light frames, my flat frames, and then a master dark and a master flat. Does that make sense so far? Okay, so and the first thing you can do with that, sorry, I meant to show this, but this is basically where you can do multi-channel, as what I'm doing, which is different types of filters, and multi-sessions if you wish, multi-different sessions over, you know, periods of years. You could even do it, you know. So the next thing you would, I know there's a lot of tabs here. Basically, you normally would follow, you can follow each of the tabs in order, but you don't necessarily have to do that. Okay, so I just jump to Analyze Stars, and I then run the Analyze Stars routine. Okay, so I'm going to, hopefully this won't take too long. I normally run at 1,000 stars, but it'll then do calibration and create the flats for that. Hopefully this won't take too long, but if it does take too long, I'll just cancel it and I'll just open the calibration frames itself. So my computer is now whirling away, creating the calibration for all of the frames that are being created already. So, or added in, sorry. So it might take about 1 or 2 minutes. Okay, so we'll just let that run in the background. Hopefully that's okay. You can still hear me, yeah?
Yep.
Yep. Okay. So I'll just, while it's doing that, I'll jump through the different other sections of it. Okay, so the main one is obviously the load, analyze stars, and then you can jump directly to integration. Okay, so you don't necessarily have to do all of the steps, but some of the steps might be relevant. For example, if you're doing mosaics. Okay, and I'll show you that in a wee minute. So in here, then you would have this is your integrate frames, the integrates tab. So you've got load, analyze stars, and integrate. Now I'll explain why we've done the analyze stars in a second. In here, there's a number of settings which are useful. Okay, the first one, this is where you can determine how I'm going to integrate. So I'm going to integrate it per channel, that is per filter type, as in hydrogen alpha, oxygen 3, or whatever, RGB, or just integrate the whole lot together. Okay, and there's other options there as well. So you can integrate per session, so you can create integrations per session that you're using. That is useful for mosaics. Further down, and I know there's a lot of settings here, but generally a lot of them you don't normally use. Okay, so down here, one of the more useful ones is LCN, which is local normalization. So I know that Tom, you recommend using 2nd degree and 3 here, but basically what this setting does, say for example you took multiple sessions over a month, and there's different moon phases, so the background of illumination in the dark and the sky is brighter. Okay, and this is a way of normalizing all of the gradient across all of your images. Okay, so that they all look the same. Okay, so that's the idea, and that's my understanding of it anyway. So and that's useful for, as I said, if you've got multiple sessions over many different days with different illumination, particularly useful for if people like myself would shoot in town with lots of light pollution, I find. The next item is enable multi-band blending. This is very useful for particularly if you're doing mosaics. So, or if you have images which are not exactly perfectly aligned in terms of a rotation. So if you're taking an image, it may be, you know, one flame is like this and the other flame is just slightly off an angle. And this basically tries to blend the two things together to create a more even frame so you don't see stacking artifacts. Okay. And particularly useful for doing mosaics, it's the overlap generally that you would set this to. So say, for example, you have an overlap when you're doing a mosaic of 15%, you would put that to 15%. And that would try and blend in, prevent any stacking artifacts. Okay, and the other settings down here, I don't know if people understand what dither is. Do everybody understand what dither is or not? Yes or no? Yeah. Okay, so when you're doing dithering, you can do drizzle, and these are the drizzle settings I would use for droplet size, obviously to get more sharper but noisier image. Then you would decrease the droplet size, and then the scale is the scaling factor of, you know, depending on how big your image you want to be. So I use the one that Tom recommends, which is 0.8 droplet size and 1.2 scale. So that's what I use all the time. So unless somebody else has any other sense, that's the ones I use typically. Okay, so now we've so I'm just going to jump back, and I'll do that process in a second. So the whole idea of doing the analyze stars is to give a quality score, okay, on your frames, and to do a reference. So it'll pick a reference and it'll give you a quality score based on noise and based on focus and things like that. And you can see here there's a various range of different quality score. Typically, what I do when I'm here, I would take the bottom 4 or 5 frames and just reject them. All right, I just throw them out, depending on if then you would see ones which are particularly bad. So you can also, I forgot to say, if you double click a frame, it'll load the frame in the field here. Okay, so you can actually see it. So like this. Okay, so you can actually review the frames as well. I forgot to say about that. Okay, so you can see here this is analyzed. My oxygen 3 as well, and you can see there's a couple of here that wouldn't be particularly good. I just click them and just remove them. Okay, so I'm not going to stack those. So that's typically how I would do it. But it gives me a quality score. You can do this all in Pixinsight, but this does it everything for you. And then when you're stacking, you can then, I'll reject that one too because it looks a bit rubbish. So that you can then, as I said, analyze it, see which ones are the quality scores best, and then stack those. Okay. All right. So now that you've done that, you can then go to your integrate tab and then just run the integration. Okay. So I'm not going to do that because that will take a few minutes. All right. So I'm just going to imagine, so through magic, that it's completed that. So I'm just going to load the frame that was stacked for this particular one. So, oops, sorry, my bad. Go back to load, and then other processed, and I will load the frames that were stacked for these particular ones. Okay. Okay, so there's the hydrogen alpha. Let's just assign that. Okay, and it should be popped down at the bottom. I'll just open it. Okay, so that's the stacked frame from the hydrogen alpha. Okay, you can see there's a vast improvement because you've stacked the image. Okay, and the oxygen 3 is something similar. Okay, so actually it's not very good for this one, but I'll open it anyway. You'll see it. So if you open that. And I'll just load that up. And you can see the oxygen 3 is pretty much non-existent, right? So, that's because there's not much oxygen 3 there, but you can see in the frame, all right, if hopefully that's apparent, there's lots of gradient around the frame. Okay, can you see that? Or is that obvious? But one of the very nice tools in APP, and basically the reason I bought the software, is the remove light pollution tool, right? So in here, you can actually do gradient removal using this particular tool. And you'll find this is absolutely amazing sometimes when you see it happening, working. So you've got your frame. You can see there's vignetting around here or gradient of some description. So once you open the frame, you then need to go around to areas which are no real stars in them. So for example, here and create boxes. All right. So I just generally trying to find nice, even locations with not a lot of stars in them. Okay, if you can. And then you then recalculate, and you can see the frame then is now almost completely flat. Okay, do you see that?
Difference.
What?
Huge difference, yeah.
Huge difference, yes. And it's an absolutely brilliant tool. It's probably one of the best tools, and those are Pixinsight has a lot of tools like this, but this by far is probably one of the better ones. Now you can go around and then get more accurate, and and just keep going. If you want it to get it more accurate, you just need to play with it a bit. So at the moment you can see that's pretty decent. And if you want, you can actually show you can see the actual gradient model that it's actually removing. So it's quite a significant difference. So, and you can create then, just press save and then save that as a frame. Okay. Does that make sense? Now there's lots of other tools in here, and to be completely honest, I don't really use them. I might have used the combine RGB in the past to combine stacked RGB frames, but I've never actually gone further than doing, using the other ones here. Okay, so if you ask me about them, I probably won't be able to tell you. Okay, so
yes, and some people will process completely in APP and produce fantastic pictures. Personally, I think it's a little up to this point. I think it's the best tool for stacking and light pollution removal. I think it's cumbersome after this point to actually try and combine and produce a nice image.
I've seen people doing all right. Yeah, I know that Andreas actually does that sometimes. He doesn't use Pixinsight, so but to be honest, like the simplicity of it, I know it may look complicated, but I find it's also the simplicity of just loading your frames in, and then you can do your analysis, picking your the best frames that you want, and then integrate them. So there's really 3 tabs that you choose: that one, that one, that one. Okay.
I'm even more lazy. I go from number 1 to number 6.
Right. Yeah.
You must know that your frames are all good.
But that's APP out of the box. The default settings are great.
Yeah.
You can tweak, but out of the you'll produce something 99% of the way there by doing exactly that. Go from 1 straight to 6 and hit integrate.
Yeah. The only other thing that I would use it for is mosaics, right? And it's brilliant for mosaics. I have to say, it's absolutely hands down probably the best thing.
I think mosaics, and if you go to registration there, so you'll see use dynamic distortion corrections. Go back up a sec, Marky.
Oh yeah, sorry, go on this one. Yeah.
So go back up. Yeah. So same camera and optics and use dynamic distortion correction. So I use this quite a bit. So APP is great if you take images with different telescopes that have reasonably similar field of views, but they don't have to have exactly the same field of view. So I might have taken some images last year with a particular scope, even if it's a refractor. And this year I might add to it. I might take the reflector out and get some additional HA. And APP does a great job of munching all that together. And it does a proper distortion correction. Like it actually tries to model the curvature of your images and correct for that when it goes to stack them. So I think, for mosaics, and if you have data from different years or certainly from different scopes, APP does a better job, in my opinion, than Pixinsight.
Yeah, no,
I've been able to stack with in APP with 2 different cameras, 183 and 294, using shots from my William Optics CS61 and my new ASCAR 500. And
I've done some
stack perfectly as well. So it's like 2 scopes, 2 cameras, and it still stacks images from both. So it's pretty good, yeah.
Yeah, testament to that, because I had the William Optics 61 as well, and then I got the ASCAR 400, and they're different focal lengths, so they just blend in. So if you are doing mosaics, you would normally add in your frame for whatever section it is, and stack that, and then stack another one for the second section, the third section, the fourth section. Do not try and stack them all together. You'll be waiting for several days to stack. Right?
It might never finish.
They never finish. I did it first time and I was like, dear God, is it going? And left it to nearly 3 days and it was stacked. I thought it was. So my recommendation, if you're doing do section 1, stack everything for that. Section 2, stack for that. 3 and 4. And then the way to do that though is when you've got your frames stacked for each section, you then restart, or what I normally do is restart APP, load in the 4 areas just as 4 frames, analyze them to get the register, and then go in here and select mosaic. And when you do that, it'll probably ask you to disable a few things. Just press yes, 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 and you'll have a very nice frame at the end. Ensure that when you're integrating, set the MPB to whatever overlap area that you have. And I've used that just recently, as I said, for the image I was doing, this one here, which is a 4-panel mosaic. So there you can't see any stacking artifacts anywhere in it at all. So that's a 4-panel mosaic, and I did it for the other mosaics I'm doing recently as well. So okay, so is there any
Martin,
other... go ahead, sorry.
Sorry there, Michael here. I just got a message there from my colleague, and his tablet there died, and he's trying to log back in again.
Oh, right, sorry. My bad. Oh, sorry, Michael. Yeah, sorry. I'm not keeping an eye on the... I assumed everybody joined already. So I'll give him a second just to join in again, sorry. So is there any other particular questions in regard to stacking and ABP that people want to ask about? Or
the only comment I'd have about the light pollution removal, the gradient removal, really, is that there's a new kit on the block just come out, which is GraXpert.
Yes, I've used it once. Yes.
Yeah, the AI version is absolutely amazing, and it needs even less mouse clicks than the APP version.
Yeah, I've been playing with it. Keith asked me to try and process one of his images he took in Namibia. This one, all right. So I stacked this for him, and it was absolutely horrible looking. Airglow on this side of the image. So it's much significantly reduced now. I deleted his frames, but he asked me to do that, and I used I couldn't get it out using APP. It wouldn't. The image size was enormous, and it just seemed to be unable to cope with it. So it was several gig of image size. I was trying to use it, and it just wouldn't properly work in here. So I used GradeX or something like that. What's the name of it again? I can't remember the exact.
GraXpert.
GraXpert, yeah, something like that. Yes, I downloaded and used that. Not so long. That's it there. Yeah, GraXpert.
Just a question on GraXpert. I've used it a couple of times, or maybe it's my old computer. Does it take a long time normally with
it can take
other
a while,
people's computers there, or is it just me?
When I was processing Keith's image, it took several minutes. All right, yeah. Just to, but it seemed to do a really good job, I have to say, compared to APP for extreme gradient removal that he had.
It may be GPU accelerated. For me, a normal ASI 2600 takes maybe 10 seconds or so.
Oh, okay, there's something wrong with my setup then, because it's taking a couple of minutes just to do a normal frame.
I had the same. Maybe I know I do have a rather beast of a computer, but I think it was probably the size of the image from Keith.
Yeah.
It was fucking, pardon my language.
Your blur exterminator would take. So what would your blur exterminator normally take?
I've the blur exterminator, I've got it sorted. I'm using the graphics card to accelerate that with. I had to buy a new graphics card anyway, so, but obviously this new kid in the block's not using the graphics card for some reason. I don't know.
Well, I suspect it is, and maybe it's not using your new one.
Yeah, GPU.
Not sure.
Anyway, okay. I was just asking so that I know whether or not to delve a bit deeper into why it's taking so long.
Okay. All right. Okay, so excuse me. What I'm going to do is going to hand over now to Tom. That's all right, Tom.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop sharing and then make you host. That's all right. Okay, you should be host now, Tom.
I should be able to share this. Allows, oh God, open system preference. Yep. I had to jump out of Zoom and I'll get back in. It was asking me for a password to allow me to share.
Hold on a second.
So let me. Sorry, password locally. So the screen. So because we've been screen recorded, I think it's asking for.
It's the password for maybe for the.
No, it's my local settings. So my Mac is preventing me from. So I'll leave and I'll jump back in 2 seconds.
Okay, no problem. No problem at all.
Just to check, can you actually hear my voice this time?
Yes, Michael, we can. Yeah.
Yep.
You can?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, who's actually used Pixinsight before? You know, who hasn't
No.
used? Sorry, who hasn't used Pixinsight? Maybe.
Yeah, no, I haven't. No.
Okay, I think Tom's coming in again now. So, if he doesn't come in, it doesn't. Oh, he's coming in there. There he is. So, I'll just make him.
Make me host again there, and I can.
Yep.
And host, great. And hopefully this will work. Here's Pixinsight on. Here we go. Great.
There we go.
Cool. Okay, so yeah, we're basically going to take off where Marty left there in terms of using APP to produce a stacked and light pollution removed or light pollution processed image. I'm going to do two different look at two different ways of doing it. I guess the first way is just purely in Pixinsight, like what a beginner, a couple of steps you need as a beginner in Pixinsight to produce something. We can show what the end result is going to be like. So this isn't using anything fancy. This is just basically taking the red, green, and blue stars and then creating a HOO image from the hydrogen and oxygen, and then just a small little curves adjustment, and then just screening the stars back in. We'll talk about each step in a second. I'll explain a terminology there that I use that maybe not everyone's familiar with, but this is our goal here. And then on the next workflow, I'll go through typically what I do which is get to a certain point and then jump into Photoshop. And I'll explain why I do that as well. So this is actually a mosaic as well that I took. So this is the red channel, flaming star, and tadpoles nebula. So this is what your red looks like. And this is a linear image that's stretched. So Pixinsight will, you can auto stretch. If I turn the stretch off, this is, actually these images I've already stretched, so it's a bad example. I don't have an example here, sorry. Here we go. So this is what your HA would typically look like as a raw image that's unstretched. And Pixinsight, you can apply a screen transfer function like this. You'll see the little green underneath the tab there. That means that an STF is applied to the image. And all that's doing is stretching it, but just for display purposes. If you want to stretch it to produce an actual image that you're going to share, then you have to stretch it yourself or use tools to auto stretch it. So yeah, this is what the red looks like, red channel, green channel, and that's the blue and green. And then our HA, we'll look at that in a sec. Looks like this, so a lot more signal in our HA. And for those unfamiliar with what the HA, O3, and S2, when we're talking about those, there are specific filters we use. And typically you'll expose, I guess, on targets, like in this particular example, they're emission targets. And these emission targets will emit, they're made up of sulfur. Almost everything has hydrogen in it as the most abundant, element in the universe. And this gas is going to get ionized by local stars, very hot stars, that will ionize that gas, that will excite the electrons orbiting the hydrogen, and it goes up a level, or goes up 2 levels, it's up to level 3, I think. So the hydrogen alpha that we're looking at, I think, is Balmer 3 to 2. So that dropped down. And it's the, this is what allows us to take cool images, even within light pollution, under light pollution. And it kind of levels the playing field somewhat, certainly for bright nebula, for people under light polluted skies. We can produce images that are, close. We can certainly compete in some way with those under much better skies. So yeah, when we're talking about hydrogen alpha, oxygen, and sulfur, these are specific wavelengths of light that we take with filters. And most of us would use a mono camera you can, with a one-shot color camera, take hydrogen and oxygen. Or I know Astro, or I think Antlia have a filter out now where you can take S2 instead of the hydrogen for your red. So hydrogen alpha is in under the red channel, so it'll just excite the red part of your one-shot color, and oxygen 3 then spans both your green and your blue. So I think for a beginner, with Pixinsight, you're going to load up all of your images. In this example, as I say, we're going to combine the hydrogen and oxygen together into a HOO, and we're going to take the RGB stars. So for the RGB stars, all I'll do is use RGB combination to produce this. So that's going to be, you're going to be running a process called channel combination to produce that. Channel combination. You're going to put your red, green, and blue in here, just like this. Red channel, green channel, and blue channel. Blue, okay, and then run that, and you're going to produce the same result. Same result should get produced. Oh, probably put it down here or something. It is not. Okay, so this is the same as this image I previously made. So as we mentioned earlier, then these Russell Croman tools that we have are really useful. And one of those, so he's got 3 at the moment tools: a noise reduction tool, a star removal tool, and a blur exterminator tool, which is basically an AI-based deconvolution. So for here, I'm just going to extract the stars. So that's what I did here, RGB stars. So you just run star exterminator on your RGB image and enable the, I'll bring it up, I can show it to you.
Tom, I don't think we can see the pop-up, you know, the Pixinsight pop-up when you're doing whatever you're doing. I just see the screen with the images. You know, the tools that you're using for some reason. Maybe they're on a different screen.
Well, you don't see the images?
Well, I see the images, but I don't see say if you open a tool set, I don't see any of the tool set.
You don't see the RC Astro Star Exterminator here?
No.
No.
That's bizarre, isn't it?
That's strange. That was just because when you did the RGB combination, like we didn't see anything. We just saw clicking the screen a couple of times. That was it. Boom.
Maybe I'll share the entire. I'll just stop sharing a second. I'll share the entire screen. Maybe
yeah, I think that's probably the thing.
Glad you said that, because I thought I was missing something fundamental.
No, I was like, where's the pop? I was like, oh dear.
Yeah.
Desktop. Here we go. Desktop 1. So I can share the whole desktop instead of the application. Maybe that'll help.
Yay! There you go.
Yeah.
Perfect.
No, good. Okay.
So maybe if you want to step back one step, Tom. Sorry. And
yeah. No worries. Yeah. Yeah. So okay. So maybe give a quick. We pause there. So Pixinsight allows you to open up images, just like a red, green, and blue here. You just go File, Open. So after you've processed an APP, if that's how you do it, you can open up your files in Pixinsight. Pixinsight itself can do all of the stacking for you. There's in fact, there's a nice script that helps you do a lot of similar things that you would in APP. It's called Weighted Batch Preprocessor. It's a little bit more complicated, I think. And in fairness, I think Pixinsight, if you're just doing single session, Pixinsight will do just as good a job as APP. If it's a single frame you're taking or a single image and it's not mosaic based, it'll do just as good. As we mentioned already, APP, I think if you're combining data from multiple sessions or doing mosaics, APP is the way to go. But you load your images and then you've got all these processes that you can run. It's a little scary, I think, it's at the start, just seeing the amount of processes. But even people who are well experienced with Pixinsight probably only use 5 or 6 or 7 of these individual processes. So don't be put off by all of these. You don't even need to know what 90% of them do. Certainly, I think with these new Russell Grumman tools, I think they take out a lot of previously, even for noise reduction, you'd have to learn about 2 or 3 different, or maybe even 4 different ways of doing it to deal with noise. But these new AI-based tools are.
Julian, you have a question there?
Yeah, quick question. So you mentioned like that even most experienced people would be using maybe 6, 7, whatever. Out of these 6, 7, how many are like extra plugins or something that you pay apart from the regular software?
No, good question. I think with the Russell, we keep going on about the Russell Grumman, but I think let's go with Star Exterminator first, because there is a reasonable competitor to that called StarNet 2, which does a pretty close job, and it's free.
I use that in Serial, yeah.
Yeah, and there's a plugin as well for Pixinsight, and I think StarNet 2 does almost as good a job, I think, as Star Exterminator. I think where Star Exterminator, for me anyway, with the Newtonian for spikes, Star Exterminator does a much better job dealing with diffraction spikes than StarNet. And you'll find some example images where StarNet does better, and you'll find some example images where Star Exterminator does better. I think overall Star Exterminator might have a slight edge, I think, but there's a very good, very close free tool.
Is that StarNet Plus you're on about when you say StarNet?
Yeah, StarNet 2.
Yeah, there's a version 2 of that StarNet Plus.
You add it into a particular folder in the Pixinsight install, and it'll add, and then there's a process for adding in. There's instructions if you go on to their website how to do it. So
the other 2 tools are, in my opinion, humble opinion, irreplaceable. I think Noise Exterminator is brilliant and simple. It's one click. Yes, you have to pay for it. I think Noise Exterminator is $50, I think. But the alternative is, again, it depends on your skies that you have. So if you have better skies, you're just going to end up having less noise. If you're under light pollution, you have to deal with noise. Unless you're 20, 30, 40 hour integrations.
There is another free software after crocking up in the last month or so. It's called Astro. Have you heard of it?
Yeah.
Well, it's free. It does okay for me anyway. It's working, free. Like,
does it do noise as well? I thought it was just sharpening.
If I ran it, I don't know what to go. I tell you most things. Something I don't understand. I just go to the AI side of it, and it says sharpen, but it actually denoises as well.
Okay.
The end product is a real enhancement there. I've noticed,
Yeah, no, that's fair. And then Blur Exterminator, I think, there is Astro Sharp, and I haven't used it, but I've seen some videos of it, and it seems to do something very, very similar. Again, I love Blur Exterminator. I think it does a fantastic job. I used to do a lot of deconvolution, and I quite enjoyed doing the deconvolution.
I don't know. Are you bad?
But it takes. It's as much art as it is science, I think. There's a lot of steps involved in doing a deconvolution.
I actually don't understand deconvolution. It's got to do with the star sizes, and every time I tried it, it just ended up being disastrous.
Yeah, it's complicated. It's not easy, and you kind of have to. You can mess it up very easy, and that's why I think Blur Exterminator is brilliant, because it's a one-stop shop, just drag and drop, and we'll do an example of it just to show, because I think it's great. So I think those tools, you don't have to have those tools, but I think they make your life a lot easier if you have them.
And these 3, so it's Noise, Star, and Blur Exterminator, yeah? So they are all plugins on top of the regular license?
Yes, so they're all paid for. So there are additional plugins that you can get for Pixinsight that are free, and there's a lot of them that are free. So there's a lot of additional scripts here. If I can show you all these resources, updates, manage repositories. So all of these are free. Actually, they're not all free because some of the Russell Chrome ones here. So these ones are plugins that you download from the web, but you pay for these 3, and the rest of them are just free plugins that I've used or you could get to use. So this is the GHS, the generalized hyperbolic stretch, which is really cool. There's some of the scripts. I like the easy processing scripts now and again.
They've actually
So yeah, you can.
the easy processing suite's now gone from the later version of. You can't.
Yeah, I think somebody's taken it on, and you can. There's another repository that you can download.
You obviously haven't updated your.
I haven't because you lose the easy processing.
Yeah.
Stuff. Somebody else, as far as I know, somebody's taken that on and updated those scripts.
Okay.
So yeah, this is just the beginner. I think these are just a couple of steps that you need. So we've looked at channel combination. Let's do that again because you guys missed that. So channel combination literally takes 3 monochrome images and generates an RGB image from them. So I've put the red channel in red, green in green, and the blue in blue. And that just combines those channels together. So I've previously stretched these just for time. I'll do a little stretch on the HA linear now, just so you can see what stretching is all about.
So do you stretch them separately and then you stack the...
That's what I typically do, because the stretching, and I'll show how I stretch using histogram transformation. The way I stretch, I try and get my curve, the peak of that curve when I'm stretching in the same place. And when you do that and then combine, usually your background is fairly neutral and it doesn't require any other, well, maybe slight tweaks, but you can do those tweaks in Photoshop afterwards. So that's just how I do it, and doing it individually as well with narrowband in particular, you usually find that your oxygen 3 and your sulfur 2 are far weaker than your hydrogen alpha. So I might actually move and shift that oxygen 3 over or apply a curves to it afterwards just to stretch it out a little bit more, just so I get a little bit of oxygen. And otherwise the hydrogen alpha can usually completely take over the image.
You can use a linear fit function as well to match the images before you process them.
Yeah, I typically don't use the linear fit for the reason that it's, again, the hydrogen is usually a lot more, usually a lot more hydrogen than there is oxygen. So in this example, if we look at both the hydrogen and the oxygen, and there's no oxygen in the flaming star. So this image is mostly background for oxygen. This image is mostly hydrogen alpha. So if I match these images together using a linear fit, it's just looking at the counts. So if the nebulosity is quite different in one image than the other, then linear fit's probably not a good tool to use. If you have a reasonably same amount of nebulosity in each, then yeah, linear fit will do that for you. And again, that's why
I do it like you, Tom. I do it with the curves, matching the curves. But then I actually use Pixel Math to put them together. It's just a different way of doing the same thing. It's just...
Yeah. So I think for beginner, yeah, exactly. So in this example, I'm just kind of looking at some beginner ones. In the next one, I use this dynamic H, the 4X palette to generate a dynamic HOO, which is Pixel Math based. So I think there are 6 or 7 processes that you kind of would typically use, and channel combination is one of those. Pixel Math is another, obviously. Okay.
When you said about the curves being at the same place, like, do you find that there is a sweet spot for usually different targets, different type of targets, or you find that there is kind of some sort of pattern?
I wouldn't say a sweet spot. So if we look at a linear image here, you can see everything's over on the left-hand side.
Yeah.
Typically. So this is why it's dark, and you'll get some spots which are those slightly overexposed stars, which you can't help, but they're all up here, and there's likely nothing here in the middle. So for me, if I were to stretch this, So I'm going to reset, apply that. And this is just a preview, so you can actually see this in real time, the changes. So this is a midpoint transfer function. So you drag this midpoint over to the left, and you can see this is changing this from a linear, so a line, to a curve. And you bring that all the way over. And why is that not tracking? Just HAV. Waiting for some bizarre reason. Sex explanation.
You probably have to use screen transfer function.
I think I was on the red channel instead of the reset didn't actually reset it. Here we go. Let's try this. Here we go. Now something's happening. So we're moving this histogram over to the right here, and you can see it brightening the image. So I do a combination of a couple of stretches, and I typically try and fit the curve between this line and this line, typically. So if I were to do that first one, let's reset. I do another curve, and you bring the curve back over to the left, you adjust the black point here. Stretch it a little bit more. And I'm looking for a light stretch here. So now we can start to see the image. I'm looking for a very light stretch, and I might. It very much depends. I do the hydrogen alpha first, and I try and remember where the intersection points are for the curve here and here. If I'm trying to get this peak in the middle of these two, maybe something like this there. Sometimes I'll just use those intersection points and actually try and get my stretch so that, so this point and this point. And I'll try and do the same for my other channels. And it's a good starting point. You don't want to overstretch initially. So typically I'll just stretch enough to reveal, and then I'll use star exterminator to remove the stars. And then I'm free to do whatever I want to the nebulosity without having overblown the stars. So that's typically
what do you remove the stars then to do?
Yeah, so in this example, I've taken RGB, and I'm going to use that RGB just for the stars because I like the colors of stars. I think it enhances the image. And if you use the HOO, you can colorize the stars and get colors into the stars, but they're not the real colors of the stars. So I'll process my hydrogen alpha and my oxygen. I'll remove the stars, and I'll do what processing I need to make that hydrogen alpha combination look nice. And then at the end, I'll add the RGB stars back in. And by doing it that way, and that's the way I'd recommend everybody does it, because the way you want to process the stars is quite different to how you want to process everything else. So the nebulosity is quite weak, and you really want to stretch that nebulosity and manipulate that nebulosity. You don't want to apply all that same processing to the stars. So you remove them, you keep a light stretch for the stars, so you can keep the color. You don't want to overstretch the stars. If your stars are all up at 90%, they're not going to have any color to them. So you want to keep that nice color in the stars with a very light stretch, remove the stars then, and do everything else with a starless image. It's typically how I do it, and I recommend everybody do it that way. It keeps the stars nice and tight as well. They don't look overblown. So if we say that's good enough there, well, let's apply that and close the preview. If I were then, what I do now typically is do a star exterminator and just run star exterminator. We don't need the stars here, so if I drag that in, it just removes the stars and does a great job of it. So I'll do that for both the hydrogen alpha and the oxygen 3, and then I'll combine them. And again, you can just use the channel combination to combine them. It's a HOO, so the hydrogen goes to red and oxygen goes to green and blue. And this particular image, if we just look at the local history, this is just the combination of it. You'll see there's a slight blue cast here. So I think the hydrogen, when I did the stretch for the oxygen, I slightly overstretched the background relative to the hydrogen. And then I just applied a little curves to kind of pull down the green and the blue to bring it in line more with the red, and then I get a kind of neutral background. You can use other tools like background neutralization to do the same thing. But with the real-time preview, you can pull, as I say, the curves down for the green and the blue and adjust it to something that's reasonable. So this is my HOO, and then I just add the stars back in.
Sorry, Tom, can you maybe just show how you did the combination of the hydrogen oxygen?
Yeah. So it'll be exactly the same as I did for the channel combination. So if I go back up to channel combination, where is it? Channel combination. Here I put my HA. Here I put my O.
So for people not knowing how he's doing that, maybe you can show how you're naming the frame.
Yeah.
So that's understandable.
Yeah. So I'll typically, so here's the file name that came in, flaming star HA session 1.fits. And that by default will be the name on the tab here. So I'll just typically rename that to be, for the hydrogen alpha HA, for the oxygen 303, and the sulfur, I'll rename it to be S2. And then this is the name then you're using all those formulas. So this is the identifier for the image. So in any of the tools you use, then I can say, well, this image, the one I called HA, I want to go into red. The one I called O3 into green and blue. You can also just click here on the right-hand side and you'll get the full list of images and do the same thing. So if you didn't rename, typically you'd have the HA somewhere, like in this is the full name down here. You'll see HA and you just pick the HA one. So if I run that, we'll get, now the HA here has the stars in it. I haven't removed the stars. I think what I did is, in this particular example, I combined and then ran star removal, which you can do as well. So that's it. Close that down. That's it for the beginner example. So there was only a couple of tools we used there. So we used channel combination to combine the red, green, and blue. We used star exterminator, or you can use StarNet to remove the stars. Channel combination again to combine the hydrogen alpha and the oxygen 3 into a HOO. We use the curves here. We can have a look at the actual curves. Adjustment history. Can bring that up. So the curves adjustment is just like you use in Photoshop. It gives you the ability to adjust, change the underlying colors for red, green, and blue. In this particular example, this would do it for all of the colors together. So typically you'd use the curves transformation tool with everything to get a little bit of additional contrast. I'll give an example here. If I want to add some contrast to this image for all of the colors, I can ramp that up. You can see it's making a nice change there, and you can bring the black down. So this is going to add a little bit of contrast to the image. So, geez, Pixinsight's acting up tonight. I'm guessing it's because of the zoom.
Yeah, it sometimes does that. What's in, unfortunately.
Anyway.
So one thing you might want to show, Tom, is how you combine the stars with the.
Yeah, I'll show that in a sec. That's a bit of pixel map. So here we go. So I can, curves is just a way of remapping input to output. So along here you have each individual count, what the input is and what the output is. If you make the curve up higher, you're going to brighten. If you make the curve lower, you're going to darken. And typically what you want to do is apply what's called a little bit of an S-curve, where you're going to darken the background and brighten the foreground a little bit, and just to give a little bit more contrast in the mid-range. And then what I did for the background neutralization is I pulled down the red ever so slightly. I pulled down the green a little bit more, and I pulled down the blue the same amount as I pulled down the green. And that gave me a nice kind of dark, neutral, dark background. Just take out that slight blue tinge. Then when we're using Star Exterminator, if we bring it back up on this image, go back, the option is to on-screen the stars. So when you generate the star image, if we do it on this guy, generate the star image, you want to on-screen the stars when you're generating this this star, the star version. So this is generate two images now, a starless and the actual stars. So this is the image we had before without the stars, and these are the actual stars here. And the on-screen is important, and the way you would screen those back in is important as well. So you just don't add the stars. A lot of YouTube you'll see they'll just do a pixel math where they add the stars back in. But mathematically, it's not advisable to do that. You'll just change the profile of the actual star. So there's a mathematical operation to on-screen, and the inverse operation, then you screen them back in. And it keeps the actual profile of the star. So to apply that, if we have this image, and I have my RGB stars, as Brendan mentioned, there's something called pixel math, which is really, really useful. This allows you to write an actual expression. Now this looks horrible and complicated, but even on this tool with the RC Export tool, if you go into, I can't remember where it is now. He used to have, maybe it's on his website, he has this actual formula. I won't get into this. I think just an overview of the actual tool. This tool allows you to combine multiple images together or manipulate that image in some way. You can apply formulae, so it's like a maths editor. You put sine waves in here if you want, or medians, or whatever you want to do. Basically, you can generate a new image by applying some mathematical operation on multiple other images. So here, when we have our HOO and we want to add the stars back in, this is the formula you use. But the good news is that you do this once and you can save out the icon here, and then you don't need to worry about it. You just copy and paste this from the web, or copy and paste it from this video and put it in. What's important is the names of these images. So these are the identifiers. So it just so happens that I'll always rename, when I'm doing RGB stars, I'll always have the name RGB_stars. And this is just whatever the target image is. So this $T is whatever the target image is. So when I drag and drop this in here, it's going to take the target image that I dragged the process onto, and then it's going to screen those RGB stars back in. Does that make sense? So I think this is a decent image with very little steps in Pixinsight. As I said, there's channel combination, there's star exterminator, and there's a little bit of pixel math, and there's curves. Well, there's 4 processes. To go one step further, if we were to jump into the next pre-prepared set of images, what I've done is I've taken the RGB stars from the previous example, and then what I typically do is I'll produce a couple of color combinations. So this is the straight HOO, just like we did in the previous. I have this HOO dynamic. So there's something called 4x palette, which it just so happens for HOO is to put the H into red, the oxygen into blue, and then green is this horrible looking thing, power of inverted pixels, but it works. Again, you can just copy and paste this from the web.
Yeah, I'll share a link actually.
Yeah,
useful.
So if I run this now and again, I always call my images, the hydrogen alpha HA, the O3O3. In this case, I don't have any sulfur. But if I run that, oops, just clicking the wrong one, it's going to produce a slightly different but nice if we bring up the, actually I'll do the one I previously generated. So we can compare and contrast these. So that's normal HOO, and then this is this dynamic. So you'll see there's a nice little bit of, brings in a little bit of orange, a little bit of extra color in there for a HOO, which is kind of nice. And that's, you know, my favorite. Again, it depends on the target, I think, but my favorite at the moment is this 4X. And this is just another one. This is just a blended green. Again, HA will be in red, oxygen will be in the blue, and then the green will be some combination of HA and O3. And I'll again, depends on the target, but I have a couple of different pixel math scripts that I've saved out. I'll run them. I produce a couple of different color combinations, and, you know, I'll pick which one I like the most. Again, we've removed, I haven't removed the stars in this one, but I'll typically remove the stars. I'll do the quick stretch, and the same stretch we've done on the previous example. And I'll just remove the stars and then do my color combinations, produce a couple of different ones, and pick whichever one I think is my favorite. In this example, I picked this dynamic HOO. Then, you know, something different from the previous one, again, is taking a luminance. And why you take a luminance, and why we would, is that typically when you're taking deep sky or taking pictures of deep sky objects, the hydrogen alpha is usually the cleanest and it has the most detail. And usually, you know, in some targets, there's oxygen in little buckets on its own, and that's the nice kind of blue or teal colored you'd see in DSOs. Sulfur 2 is usually all of it, typically in combination with hydrogen alpha. But my point is, usually you can take just the hydrogen alpha on its own and use that as a luminance. And in this particular example, there's a couple of extra processes that we've done to this image. In the linear stage, you would use blur exterminator. And it's important that you do your deconvolution on the linear data, so before you stretch it. So always run blur exterminator, do deconvolution in linear. The maths just doesn't hold up if you stretch it. So run your blur exterminator. So we go back up to this point, and we do a screen transfer. I don't know if this is going to work all that well. Do before and after of it. Let's do this before. This guy. Let's get back to here, just after the blur exterminator. We can see a difference here. Let me do a preview. Just zoom in. Maybe on this guy. You can't really see much there. So this is before deconvolution, and this is after the blur exterminator. It just tightens everything up a little bit. I apply very little. I think some people overdo it, and it looks a little bit fake, the blur exterminator, and the default settings at 90% is way too much. So I typically dial it back down to about 30%, and it just gives, you know, sharpens it up a little. I don't know if that's coming across on Zoom, but that just tightens everything up. It's tightened the stars ever so slightly. I probably could have done a little bit more, in fairness, but yeah, just tightened everything up. So again, so these are just the additional steps I typically would apply. So blur exterminator and linear, and then I do my stretch. Then I'll run noise exterminator on it. We can do that in a sec. And then this particular case, this is how I did it. So you do blur exterminator before you remove the stars as well. So blur exterminator does need stars. It does need to get a PSF from your stars to be able to do the blur extermination or the deconvolution. Noise exterminator works great with or without stars. Remove the stars. I applied here local histogram equalization. We can look at that again. And this is just a way of getting a little bit of extra contrast into the image. If I I just run through these steps, you might be able to see it. So this is blur exterminator. I've done my stretch, so I'll just have to take this off. So apologies for that. And then noise exterminator, you won't be able to see it here, but they'll be, if you zoom in, you'll see the noise has been far reduced. Move the stars, and then you'll see a slight contrast adjustment here. You see that? So that just gives a little bit of contrast. So typically I'll do 2 runs of local histogram equalization, and this is just a histogram equalization tool to apply contrast to specific regions. So if you use in this example, I use a radius of 128, so that's going to kind of medium to high level detail. It's going to try and stretch that out. And then I'll run a one for the lower, maybe 32 or 64. And if this is the big scale, so you'll see the big scale got a little bit of a stretch in there. And then the small scale stuff right in the middle of that nebula got a little bit of a stretch. And why you want to do that is your contrast is, it adds detail, it adds a little bit of punch, it gives a little bit of depth to the image. So again, we've only added, I think, a couple of additional processes, and typically these are all I use. And this last one is dark structure enhance. It's a script. So if you look at the before and after here, it's very subtle, but those dark regions will just get a little bit darker. So it gives a little bit of extra stretch to those dark regions to separate them out from the nebulosity. But again, that's all I added. And this is typically all I'll do in Pixinsight, are these couple of tools. So, getting familiar with the channel combination, getting familiar with pixel math. And even with the pixel math, you can just drag and drop, these little scripty things from the web, come formula. And then curves, get used to the curves transformation. And then the Russell-Krohmann tools are great. I like the local histogram equalization. There's other, once you jump into Photoshop, there's other ways of doing it within Photoshop, but I typically will do at least a little bit in Pixinsight with the local histogram equalization, as I say, large scale, small scale, and then a small little bit of dark structure enhance. And then at this stage, then I'll jump into Photoshop. I think once you get to this point, I think Pixinsight APP is my favorite tool for stacking, because it works for me in terms of, I have lots of data from over the years that I try and reuse as much as I can. And then Pixinsight's great for everything I've just shown, in particular the Russell-Krohmann tools. Although you can get the plugins for Photoshop as well. And as I say, once I get to this point, I'll typically jump into Photoshop, because I think it gives a little bit more, we're kind of done with all the mathsy, sciencey bit, and then Photoshop is where you bring it all in, and this is the kind of artistic license within Photoshop to have that ability to adjust. So Photoshop is non-destructive, or can be used in a non-destructive way, which means you can make an adjustment, go off and do something else, and go back and readjust that in real time and see what it looks like, because maybe you overdid it in one step, and then you go on a couple of steps. With Pixinsight, if you run a process that you're happy with, and then you go down a couple of steps and you're unhappy with it, you have to roll all the way back and redo everything. So it's destructive editing. So you apply a filter here, it's destructive, if that makes sense. Maybe if I show Photoshop, it'll make it a bit more sense. Okay. So this is basically the HOO that I've saved out. So once I'm in Photoshop, this is the dynamic HOO. So this is this guy that I've saved out as a 16-bit TIFF. I've saved out my stars, a 16-bit TIFF, and my luminance, and this guy, well, I've saved him out as well as a 16-bit TIFF. And I've loaded those into Photoshop. So here's my HOO, here's my luminance, and here are my stars. I'll show how I do all this, but I'll jump. Here's one I prepared earlier, kind of thing, just to kind of quickly show where we're trying to go to and what it might look like. So again, at the bottom, you're going to have your RGB, And this is just your color data. So when you're working with luminance like this, or you're working with a luminance, your RGB data is just color. So it doesn't have to look all that pretty. It just has to have all the right colors in the right places. So it has to have, you know, well, if we add the stars in, it's still a nice image. But you'll see when we add the luminance in, the difference it can make. So these are all the steps I went through to produce an image, if we go through them. So again, Photoshop, we have all these different layers, and all of these tools and processes that I've applied, I can reapply and I can change. So this, in this particular example, I basically created a mask and I did a color balance to try and pull out a little bit more blue in this region here. If I'm unhappy at any stage with this and I want to apply more, I can just bring up this tool and I'm free to, you know, redo what I did there. Or if I want to add more or take a little bit less off, want to change the mask or whatever I want to do, and I can turn on and off quickly. So this is something you can do very nicely and quickly in Photoshop that you just can't do in Pixinsight. And again, you have a little bit more color balance here. Again, this looks over saturated, but you'll see once you add the luminosity in, you actually need a little bit of additional saturation. So the RGB data that you'd use when you're combining with luminance is on its own probably overkill. So yeah, we've targeted in here for blue. I've added in a little bit of overall kind of color balance to the red areas in here. Again, there's a mask. I'll have a little bit of a stretch and a little bit of extra vibrance. So for me, that's typically, you know, what a good underlying, I call it chrominance data. So it's just the color data. Then when you apply the luminosity, we just have a look at the luminosity on its own. Again, these tools, non-destructive, so I'll change the levels. So that's just bringing that bottom level up. Again, you can go in and see exactly the change that I made. So I just brought that black level up a little bit, just to bring the black level in the image down. And then I've applied a little bit of a curves, and that curve will be an ever so slight kind of S-curve to the image, just to bring out a little bit of additional contrast. So when I add that luminosity into the color data now, we get this. So if I toggle my luminosity, so here's the color data and that we had, which is a nice image, but then all the nice detail that you have is in your luminosity. So this is why the luminosity on its own in Pixinsight, we're going to apply the blur exterminator because that's the sharpening. And we're going to do all of the contrast enhancements just on the luminosity, because that's where all the brightness difference, in terms of how your eye sees, it's the luminosity. It gives it that all the various brightness levels, contrast, structure, detail. That's all in the luminosity. And the color data is just literally, well, what color is it here? Here's my intensity from the luminosity, and the color data is it red, green, or blue, or whatever shade underneath. So this is a good starting point, and we've done not a whole lot. And at any stage, I can add my stars back in. And with the stars as well, you can apply individual curves. So again, one good thing about pulling the stars out is that when you add them back in and do it this way in Photoshop, you can change. So I've applied a curves here to the stars. So I can adjust how I think my stars might best look with the underlying nebulosity. So do I want my stars to overtake everything? Or do I just want to dial the stars back a little bit and give the nebulosity, allow it to shine through a little bit. So doing it this way and applying the tweaks, this is the artistic bit, as I said. And it allows you to do this iteratively and quickly. You can't do this in Pixinsight. Again, this is why I use Photoshop for this particular part of my processing. And then a little bit of vibrance then in the stars as well. So again, that's a good kind of starting point. And I forgot to talk about how we actually combine these things. So the RGB data you put on the bottom, your luminosity, you actually have to tell it that it's luminosity. So this is a blending mode. So we'll go through that. I'll go through a simple step of how to do it, just so people have something, and they can throw this data up, and you can do the same thing yourself. But you have to change the blending mode. You turn the luminosity is blended, and the stars then you put in screen mode, because we've on screen those stars. You can do lighten as well if you want to, just kind of you'll see there a little bit difference in how it blends. But I think a screen mode and then adjusting with the curves is the best way of doing it. Get that nice kind of blend. You still have that nice kind of star profile and shape. You're just adjusting how bright those stars are. And a couple of other, so a soft light and an on-sharp mask with a big mask are two other go-to kind of operations that I'd use in Photoshop. So this soft light, if I turn that on, gives you a nice way of really enhancing the color. It's a lot nicer than just bumping the saturation, in my opinion. And as well, what's nice with Photoshop, you can quickly turn on and off these things, but you can also, if you've applied and have process something here, you can change the opacity of how much you want this layer to affect all the layers underneath. So you can adjust here. So this is that soft light at 100%. You can just dial it back. Here's it at 0, and then you pick a point here that you're happy with in terms of what you're looking for. Looking for a little bit of a bump in that that color.
Sorry, Tom, can you click the layers just to see what blend mode you're using?
Or the soft light? Oh, that's just pass through.
No, the one the layer 1 copy and the...
Oh yeah, okay. So this is your soft light. So this is how you would do a soft light. So you create maybe I could show when I actually combine all these things. I was just kind of trying to give a bit of a quick overview, and then we'll go through, and maybe I won't do the masking and changing the colors, but in terms of setting the blend modes and creating a soft light and doing an on-sharp mask with a big kernel.
Yeah, that sounds good. Just be aware it's I wanted to stop about 10:30, so there's about 20 minutes. That's okay.
Okay.
Max. Because
yeah, I think we're pretty close.
Yeah.
Well, how about I just jump in there, because I think we've talked enough about this, and I'll actually demo how to do this in the next step. So this is how I do it. So I'd load up all 3 images. If I take my luminosity, if I do a Control-A and a copy, and then here, if I do a paste, that should have pasted. Why do I not paste? There we go. And then I change the blend mode to luminosity. And then for my stars, again, the Control-A, Control-Copy, and I'm going to do Control-V in here, and then I'll change this to screen mode. I'll just turn these off for a sec. And actually, probably the first thing I'll probably do is on this layer 1 adjustment, I would typically do a levels just to get my black level. And this is important then as well in Photoshop, where you want to clip. If you didn't clip here, it would apply this adjustment to all the layers underneath. I only want to apply it to this layer. So you have to clip it using this. So this will now only affect the layer directly beneath it. So I'll bring my black level down a little bit just to bring it down. So maybe something about there. Again, with Photoshop, it's kind of nice because I can make a rough adjustment now, and I can go back and adjust that at a later stage. I might apply a little bit of a curves then as well. I'm just going to drag my curves above. So I do my levels first and then my curves. And again, just, maybe a little bit of an S curve, something like that. Maybe not as much. Don't want to overblow everything here. Again, a good rule of thumb for So you really don't, if you want to keep color, you don't want your intensity above 80%. So anything above 80% is going to start looking white, even in your stars. So you want to keep your star intensity, if at all possible, as light a stretch as you can. And same for any of the kind of the highlights here. If I were to stretch this up, any of these highlights here, they're probably, if I put a this in here, yeah, I'm at 232 here, so that's too much in terms of percentage. That's I'm gonna change that to a percentage. No, I can't. But that's probably 90 something percent. So this is going to just appear white once I apply if I apply this luminosity to my color. So you don't want to overstretch, just a light stretch, and you have to be careful not to overblow these highlights. So 218 might be just about on the cusp of 80% or so. So that's enough there. We can have a look and see what that looks like. I think for the background, so usually when you apply a luminosity to a background color, if this looks nice colored, it's going to get all washed out once you apply a luminosity. So here you have to certainly add a little bit of vibrance or saturation. Now there's no need to clip here because the only layer underneath is our background layer. If I typically I'll do something like a little bit of vibrance and a little bit of saturation. That's looking okay there. You can see what it looks like with the stars added in. And for my stars, I can add in that curves as well. Again, we want to clip it because we just want this to affect the curves. And I'll turn my stars back on and just drag those down just a wee bit. So again, good starting point. And I turn my stars off now. What I can do, how you do the soft light to get a little bit of color bump into this is turn off your stars, and then there's a funky keyboard combination. They don't have an actual menu for it, but it's Command Option Shift E. And what this will do is create a stamp. So this is basically taken all of this and it's created basically done it destructively.
That's slightly different, obviously, in a Windows keyboard. You don't have.
Yeah, so it'll be, I guess, Control
Shift E,
Alt E on a PC. Yeah.
So it's Control Alt Shift N E, I think it is.
Yeah.
So something like
that. But you'll get used to it once you do it a couple of times.
Yeah, no, you do it a few times.
Yeah. So this just what this has done. If I didn't turn my stars off there, it would have put the stars in here as well. But this image is basically I can turn this on or off, and it's exactly the same because what it's done is it's taken a stamp of everything below, or actually everything turned on that's visible, and it's put it above where I've had highlighted here. So if I do that again, this highlighted, I've turned off my stars. I'll do my funky E ninja move and create basically a stamp, and then we'll copy that again. Again, this is just for the soft light. I'll put this into a group, so you can put these into a group together. This will change to soft light, and this to luminosity. And that gives it a nice kind of little bump. And then I'll adjust the opacity to blend in with what's below. So this, like as it is now, I think that's nice. I think I won't adjust. I think 100% is pretty good. Another trick for getting a little bit of additional contrast is an on-sharp mask. So I'm going to do the same move here and get another copy, and this will include the soft light. So here I'm going to do an on-sharp mask with a large kernel on it. So it's not really a sharpen. If you do it with a large kernel, it's more like a contrast enhancement. It's just a little bit of a kind of a hack. So about 128 or so is what I normally do here, and usually this is too much, as you'll see what it's done here. So there's too much contrast here. So here's what we had previous, and we added in a fair bit of contrast, but I'm going to go to my opacity and just dial that down to some acceptable level. And you can just play with that. So maybe something like 27%. You can flick it on and off. So we've just added a little bit of nice contrast adjustment there, using effectively a sharpening tool. And then add the stars back in, and you know, you can spend hours just tweaking here, but you know, I can go back in if now I want to change the color here, I want to add a bit of extra blue, I can do that. I go down to my RGB and I adjust it. Now the only gotcha here is because I've stamped, I have to redo those because these are a destructive copy of everything below it. So if I now change the color here, it's not represented up here or in here. That's the only gotcha. So typically, before I start doing this, and that these are usually the last kind of things I do. I'm happy with the image. I just want to bump a little bit of the color. I want to bump a little bit of the contrast. And Photoshop also has this camera raw tool as well that we can go into. Again, I can create a copy here, and I usually create copies as I'm going along, and I'd usually rename these things so I know what they are. I can go into another filter here, camera raw, and this, for people who are familiar with Lightroom, this is effectively the same thing, where I can do some kind of final tweaks in here to just the nebulosity. Maybe I want to bump the contrast just a little bit. Bring down those highlights just a little bit, and you can see what it's doing to the histogram up here. You know, so this is going to raise those highlights. This will just drop those highlights just a little bit. And again, if I want to darken the image a little bit, basically this is, you know, the blacks is going to be your basically the levels, and just bringing that histogram over to the left. And there's a little bit of detail here. You can add a little bit of noise reduction if you need at the end, et cetera, et cetera. So again, in here you can play to your heart's content. By clicking apply there, you can see what kind of adjustment that made. So a little bit of a contrast adjustment, and again we just add the stars back in. And at no stage, because we've split the stars out, at no stage have we, you know, altered the stars. The stars are still nice, and they've got some color to them. We had to add a little bit of saturation in here to them. In fact, we didn't, but I will now. A little bit of adjustment. We can add a little bit of vibrance to those stars. Again, it's clipped, and just give them a little bit of a bump. And that's effectively it. That's what I do. Works for me. So again, I'd use APP to do all the stacking. I use Pixinsight to get to the point where I've got decent color data, a good luminance data, and I've got my stars pulled out. I'll jump into Photoshop and I basically apply these steps. This is my starting point, and I tweak. I spend an hour just tweaking knobs in Photoshop until I'm happy. Then I'll sit on it for a day because I'll come back and I'll want to change stuff. And you'll find as well, you're processing at nighttime. You come back in the daylight the next day, and the image can look quite different in terms of the balance. So yeah, don't rush to post on Facebook straight away. Sit with the image for a day or two. And then when you're happy, you can post it. And the good thing here as well is that this saves that actually you'll save all the layers here. So at any stage you can come back in, you can add more data back in here, you can come back in, and maybe you've learned a new fancy step like this, the soft light or the on-sharp mask, apply that to a previous image, and away you go. That's it.
Very good, Tom. Thanks for taking us through that. Learned a few things myself there.
Thanks for that.
Okay, I know there's a lot to absorb there. Fairness, for people probably who've never used Pixinsight or never used Photoshop, I would recommend basically if you are using it just to play with it, you know. The more you play with it, the more familiar you are with it, you know, and you can get demo versions of Pixinsight. So you can get a demo of that for like 30 days, I believe. Is that right, Tom?
What I actually loved there was after an hour, Tom would come back and say, "That's a good starting point."
But it does. You can spend.
You spend days in it.
Yeah.
I always
Deconvolution
find when I
used to
do the
take 2
first
hours
time,
at a time.
sorry, whenever I always do the first one, I can never get it better the second time. I don't know why. I don't know. Anyway, it's fine.
Yeah, I'd usually, even on Pixinsight, typically I'd process it quickly. I want to see what the data looks like, so I process it quickly just to get to an end result, and kind of see what I have. Then I'd start from scratch again. Maybe not complete scratch, but I'd go back a couple of steps, and knowing now what I have, and be a little bit more, take a little bit more time at each step to go, and knowing what's there. So, do I have nebulosity in the background that doesn't look horribly noisy? That, and if I try and run noise reduction on it, does it look plasticky then? Have I earned the right to display that nebulosity? And if I haven't, then I'll just hide it, and or go off and get more data.
Okay.
So there is a little bit of a kind of iterative approach. There's nothing like a good starting point, but lots of good data, because with lots of good data, you'll have to use half the tools to get a good image than you would if you have to somehow manipulate and work with and hide. And
is there any questions or go ahead?
Yeah, can I just, one thing about Pixinsight is for Tom, how do you save? Do you use the save project in Pixinsight between working on it sessions, if you like?
Yeah, so I'll create a new session, I'll create a new project for every project I'm working on, and I'll save that out. So I have the Pixinsight projects for everything, so I can go back in at any stage, and if I worked on a Galaxy as an example, so M33, and I just have RGB data, I can go off and just take the HA data. I can load up the Pixinsight process that I've already done, because a lot of those steps I'll just be able to reuse. I'll just pull in the HA and then run through the steps I need to incorporate that HA into the RGB.
And one thing you might want to show is star alignment in Pixinsight. So I find it's invaluable.
Oh yeah, I can do that. Yeah. How do I on-star align though? What's that? Actually, quickly while I'm here, the GraXpert.
Yeah.
You mentioned that earlier, Mark. So GraXpert is now, you can integrate it into Pixinsight, which is kind of nice. So here I pulled up one good example of a luminosity where there's a fair bit of a gradient in here. And you're right, it does a great job. So if I run that toolbox GraXpert subtraction with this particular image, the smoothing, and for me, attempt to execute a script recursively. Okay. I'll just run it. So I think that did a great job of removing that gradient and then exposing all this nebulosity.
Just go back and forth there again.
Yeah. Well, I'll have to reapply the screen.
The screen. Yeah.
Yeah, but there, I mean, it's gone from that to that.
Yeah, I must have a look at that. That looks very good, actually. I didn't
Yeah,
realize
it's
you
quite
could integrate.
comprehensive, actually, GraXpert.
It's free.
It's free, yeah, it's free.
Yeah. Now it works. I find it works. I've only used it for a few days now. I find it works great for something that would work great for automatic background extraction. It just does it for you automatically. If you have something complicated, like multiple sessions with, you've got, a funky kind of glow coming from because you've taken it on the west side, or whatever, or even different times of the year with different moons, and you've got glow, more complicated glow than a kind of a relatively straightforward gradient to remove, it doesn't do as well. And that's where
when you say with GraXpert, say I use an SET, so like what you're saying, on multiple nights, you know, your gradients can move around on your stack.
Yeah.
Like I even all your best flats, you could see a touch of vignetting, right? Because you know your gradient is moving. If you actually put the calibration points on with the AI, it actually helps the AI to attack it more. You know?
I've just used this Pixinsight one. I haven't used the tool itself. So this effectively through Pixinsight just uses the auto AI to
just jumps on. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so you have no ability at the moment, at least, of putting in those control points in Pixinsight. But again, for anything that would just work with automatic background extraction, I think this does a great job with just a drag and drop.
Nice to know.
Aside from that, the comment about multiple sessions and Pixinsight, I probably agree, but I have got to grips with it now. So I'm doing multiple sessions. I think once you understand how it works in Pixinsight, it is quite simple. I think the biggest disadvantage is you tend to have to you end up with quite a lot of duplication of files. Like if your flats have run over several nights because you haven't really changed your image train at all, so you've kept your flats, you kind of have to duplicate them in Pixinsight across the multiple sessions. And I think that's probably not true in APP. Is that right?
No. Yeah, you can have a library of flats if you wanted in APP and just say, hey, I want to apply these flats to this session or this session and different ones to this session.
Yeah, because in Pixinsight, the multiple session thing is basically by implication in your directory structure as opposed to a click and select thing.
Yeah, so as I said earlier, I think, and I every so often I go back to Pixinsight and wait a batch preprocessor just to see where it is. So APP used to have, Pixinsight used to not have this local normalization, and now it does. So, you know, anytime they add something new in, I'll go in and reevaluate it. And I think it's just as good now, as I say, for even over multiple nights in a row, it's just as good, I think. But I think if you've got different optics from different years, you know, with different light gradients, and it does a better job of munging all that together.
I was actually going to show GraXpert, just actually have it here open, and if I'm just going to take it back to host if you don't mind, Tom.
Yeah, no.
Sorry, 1 second.
Okay.
Team host. I have it actually open here. I'll just quickly share screen, and I don't want to take too much more time because you know I know we've gone on quite a bit. So let's see. Does that work? See that?
Mm-hmm.
So
okay,
that's basically, you know, the one image I was working for Keith for. He probably doesn't want me to show that anyway. But I don't actually have it before and after, but you load the image, basically, then you just go around picking points where you want, you know, the most gradient to be concentrated on where it's processing, as I think Michael or Mark, I think you mentioned, and then you just calculate it. And then,
so that interpolation method there, can you select AI?
Yeah, AI is in there as well, yeah.
Yeah, under the interpolation method, just drop that down.
Yeah, there's a couple of different ones, yeah.
Yeah, down the bottom there, see AI?
Yeah.
That's the one you want to use.
Well, I actually used this one, but
try AI, see what happens.
no, but it's actually been done. But see, over here, he had a lot of air glow, and it was like pure green almost. You know, in fact, the whole image was pink, and then there was green over here. It was really horrible looking. You know, so this is actually the processed image. I had to delete the other one. He wouldn't let me keep it, because he was, you know, obviously it's his images. So I just have a copy of it, of the processed one still. I'm supposed to delete it. Never mind. but that's how you would do it. You load it. You can create a grid, or you can just apply the locations, you know, where you want the sample points, which is probably the better way. Select your interpolation method, and then run the calculation.
You'll have to edit this bit of the video out of the YouTube that you're about
Possibly.
to post.
Possibly, right.
Including the fact that Keith sold me my first mount, so he's got a lot to answer for.
Oh dear. Throwing dispersions. It's terrible. I have no idea. Go on, sorry.
Just one comment about the last thing you did in Photoshop, which I found quite eye-opening for me, because I don't use Photoshop, but I do have Affinity Photo, which I've not really used.
It's exactly the same, I think. It's very close.
Yeah, so I'd be really keen on trying to reproduce what you showed us in Affinity Photo to see if it's possible.
Yeah, there's nothing I showed you in Photoshop there that I'd say you can't use in GIMP or Affinity Photo. Effectively, it's just anything that has layers, and you can have, you know, the blending modes for those layers. Everything's going to have an on-sharp mask. Everything's going to have a soft light and groups. So I suspect that any image manipulation tool that's layer based, you'll be able to use.
Yeah, I'm keen. I just need to understand. I think if I re-watch this when it's put out on YouTube and understand exactly what you've done, I will try that, because obviously Affinity Photo is a vastly cheaper option than Photoshop. It would be very handy.
Yeah, I think the big thing is you can get the luminosity to look really nice. Like that should look like a nice black and white image. But then the color data, you're going to have to make that look quite, you know, on its own, it would look horrible. It would look way too colorized. And it can be as flat as you want it. You don't have to have any detail. You just need the color in there. So that's what you're looking for in that. So if it looks a bit washed out, that's just a byproduct of the fact that when you put that as a luminosity, the color data just needs to be quite vibrant to match it.
Yeah, it's interesting because actually he's just disappeared, I think. But Michael there, we were discussing this the other night about luminosity and RGB, and I'm becoming a big fan of luminosity. It looks really promising.
Yeah, all the detail. And if you have, certainly for doing narrowband, which most, you know, I do mostly narrowband with my Portal 7s, you know, any of those targets that have HA, the HA is going to look great. The O3 is always a bit iffy. The S2 is always a bit iffy, quite noisy. But the HA is always clean. And then when you apply that as the luminosity, you can produce a nice image. It's the same doing for RGB. You know, if you have you need a mono camera to have luminosity. Well, certainly for RGB. But in terms of the time it takes to get an equivalent amount of detail, so like an hour of luminosity is the same as taking an hour of red, an hour of green, an hour of blue, because you're getting it all at the same time. So you can get far less red, green, and blue than you think you might need. And, you know, so do 20 minutes each of red, green, and blue, and do 2 hours of luminosity, and you'll probably produce a better image than, you know, taking 2 hours of red, green, and blue.
Yeah, we just need clear skies, that's all.
Yeah. Okay. I was just messing around with the techniques you were showing there. That's quite neat, actually. The on-sharp mask and all that sort of stuff. Walking about with it.
Yeah, the on-sharp mask is a good one for just pulling out giving it a little bit of a punch in terms of contrast.
Okay, excellent. Okay, I think we'll probably wrap it up there because it's going towards 10:30, I know, and it's school night, so that's okay. And hopefully it's probably stimulated a lot of questions and queries. Hopefully, and if there's anything at all, just come back to myself or Tom or whoever, one of the admins, or even just post it on the Facebook group if you wish. If you want to reach out to us as well, certainly we'll be able to help you in you know, trying to apply take some of the techniques. Obviously I do something quite different in Pixinsight probably than Tom, but it's generally the same idea. And then Photoshop, I learned something there that's really good actually, myself. So okay, well, I call it a night then, and hopefully everybody gets something out of that. If not, just reach out and we'll be able to help, as I said. So, okay.
Thanks very much.
Thanks very much. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Much appreciated.
Really enjoyed it. And it was a great insight into the applications. I'm familiar with Photoshop in other contexts. Never saw Pixinsight before. So it was a great insight to it. Thanks. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Damien.
Thank you, guys.
All right.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Take it easy.
Thanks.
All the best. Good luck.
Bye.
Thanks, Ordinary.